Back to the show, and good morning. It depends on where you're watching us from. You might just as well want to say morning because it's probably not good, but we trust that your day will be successful and fruitful. It's quite somber in certain homes that they have lost not just lives but property, livelihoods, livestock. Whatever it is that puts food on the table is as sensitive to this conversation as your health. So feel free to send in your feedback, and my team will help sample that feedback so we can share. If you have any questions as well to these panelists in studio who are experts in their own capacity, do share those and we can read them to them for their remarks and perspectives on the same. Professor Iraqi, before we took a very short breather, you said you wanted to give a different feel or touch to this conversation. Perhaps this is the time to bring it on board. At this point in time, panelists, welcome back to the show.
I think one of the issues I need to bring is we are not putting enough emphasis on climatic change. We talked about it for the last 50 years. But I think now the reality has come, that the climate has changed, weather is unpredictable. Nobody expected such heavy rain. But before we blame the weather, we also blame ourselves because we are the people who have caused the climatic change. So I think at the time we accepted that we have changed the weather patterns and we need to take concerted efforts to change that.
Unfortunately, what I picked from the Africa Summit 2023 is that the West do worse damage than we. So when you say we, do you mean humans? Do you mean Africa or Kenya?
Humans. Everybody is guilty. Kenyans, Americans, everybody. But I also want to give this debate a historical perspective.
Yes.
If you look at the people who are mostly affected by the floods in Nairobi, they are not the affluent people. Because Nairobi seems to have some historical roots. The affluent are in high-risk places. Westlands, Lavington, Tigoni, well-drained. It's people like, I don't know whether we are there, who live downstream, who are mostly affected by that. And maybe that's what we should have done after independence. We follow that pattern of making sure that certain places are reserved for certain activities, so that when there's flood, the water just flows. It does not affect people's lives. Number two, if, I don't know when you went to school, but in high school we studied about land reclamation. And the land reclamation was in Holland. It was being reclaimed from the sea. But in Kenya we have been reclaiming it from rivers, which I think is wrong. But I believe there's a solution to this.
Okay.
If you go to Mississippi, the river used to flood every time. And what they did is they put levees on the sides of the river, so that even if the water level goes up, it cannot flow out. And maybe there's time we did that for our rivers, so that they are well defended. There are embankments. I've seen that in Budarangi trying to do that.
Okay.
So there's something we can do about that in the long term. And finally, the government has a housing project. We are saying paying housing levies. I hope as they start building houses, they are going to consider they are going to consider the disasters we are witnessing now, to make sure that the houses that are going to be built by the government are safe, and when there's a disaster like this, people are not affected. We can also see a silver lining. When I go to Hamburg or to Venice,
yes,
we find people traveling through the city by boats. So maybe we can dam some rivers in Nairobi, and over the weekend I'll be moving from part of the city to the other using a boat. Why don't we see that as a silver lining?
So you pick an opportunity. You see an opportunity.
Yes, we dam the Nairobi rivers, so that even if the lane stops, we have some dams, so that we can move from one part of the city to the other using a boat.
Let me hear what other panelists think. That would be fun, he says.
He doesn't look very happy with that.
Yeah, Panda, you don't look. What do you think?
You see, Doris, yesterday morning there was a joke shared by, I think, a random person on Thika River, and that was a situation of in a flooded section where people are basically using boats. And Professor Iraqi is bringing a good scenario of damming the city to have some river transport
And a recreation.
A possibility. But I think one lesson that we pick from this is the transformation of Busia County, for example, Budalangi, where a lot of dikes were built to contain the riverbanks, to contain the backflow of the lake, and to ensure that communities around those areas are able to survive. It's not one of the counties so far listed as one of the top 5 or top 4 that are grossly affected. And so it's possible that the Nairobi River Commission, for example, can think around, building dikes to to help not just Nairobi River, but also Athi River, which is just adjacent to the city and is affecting part of our population. I see the joke in Mombasa that people can sip their beers while immersing their feet in water. That is temporary, and that excitement, I would say it's short-lived. It's reported that in Mutwapa area, for example, the water levels have risen by 4 meters. I was in Mombasa last week on Wednesday and Thursday. It was not the situation. The aspect of climate change and the future of the coastal region, for example, is at stake because the seas are not going to go down. They are going to rise. As they rise, two things that come into place. Land use and economic backtracking that, for example, Mombasa, Kilifi, and Kwale counties, including Lamu, which are historically tourism areas, are going to experience. So as a country, we can't limit this to Mombasa County or the coastal counties. It's way above them, and you know, the national government has to come in. I know there is a new establishment on the National Disaster Authority, but how are we working, for example, with the UN Habitat, with the UN Environment Kenya Country Office to ensure that for posterity, regions that are likely to be adversely affected by the rising sea levels and water levels in the coast, in the Lake Victoria area, in Baringo, for example, in Naivasha, are well catered for. Kisumu County, for example, has a local land use plan that came into force, I think, 2 years ago. That is fundamentally showing where settlement is supposed to go to, where that urbanization is going to go to, and how we are going to use the lakefront. But do we have disaster resilience planning, for example, for such a city? Do we have disaster resilience planning for, I've talked about the coastal region and the coastal counties. And Nairobi now is coming to play, the capital. When you cut off Nairobi from the rest of the country, you basically stagnating the economy because all roads lead to this capital city, and everything that gets out of here or gets into here has an economic repercussion. Right. So if we can't really plan properly for Nairobi, and it means basically we can't plan properly for the rest of the country. So it's a long-term plan. We expect even worse scenarios, not just this year, but going into the future with the advent of climate change.
They usually say, prepare for the best, but expect the worst. Let me hear from you, Tuva, because we're looking at now, there's lost productivity, reduced hours worked. We're looking at losses in GDP generally. In fact, I've just seen an update that KPLC is working on power outages on some particular parts of the country, which basically they're doing what they have to do in their capacity. But let's go deeper into those things that I have mentioned so that the authorities and those watching see the exact things for what they are. When we're talking about, hours worked, reduced, we're trying to build this economy. All right? What are we looking at in your own observation as economists? What are the losses that we're looking at incurring during this period as either people are not going to farms, people are not putting up their businesses, remember SMEs, Juakali people, and me coming to work late because of traffic?
So I'll take a step back. And my fellow panelists was saying that, all roads should lead to the capital, which should not be the case. There's a reason we set up the devolution. So we need to really break that mentality that everything must or is happening in the capital. Let's just.
But the Deputy President Gachagua has urged the other governors and stakeholders to work towards improving the city. Is he being biased?
I think he is being biased. Because I think we sit in different pots. You see, for example, the coastal community and the 6 counties. They are working together. Although the agenda might be different, right? The same strength they're having in working towards maybe one specific agenda. They should put the same regional strength, right, to work towards this current issue, right? So I feel the problem for Kilifi the problem for Nairobi should be handled by Nairobi. Kilifi or Mombasa, it's different. The thinking and the logistics and what needs to be done in different regions is very, very different. So the Deputy President telling us, okay, fine, we need to maybe put all our energy in Nairobi is wrong.
Did you really say all, though? I wouldn't say all energy.
a significant part of our energy.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel it's a bit.
How about
misplaced.
explaining to me then? Because now I want to go to typically talking to the common Mwananchi, and I appreciate, gentlemen, you are of high ranking. But
no, we are Mwananchi.
Yes, you're Mwananchi.
Yes.
But I want us to speak the language of the Mwananchi. All right. There has been conversations around, the economy is getting better for some political diocese. And I believe Iraqi was here when we discussed this. And a common Mwananchi sent in a message and said, fine, how does this translate to my pocket? And I'm looking at the high cost of living, the goods and the commodities, even with the floods. And that is what they've tasked me to ask you this morning. How do they feel, all right, the positive changes in the economy, if there's any, how does it translate to their pocket? Is it a reality on the ground?
I think that's a very legitimate question, because at the end of the day, Wanjiko and others would ask me a very simple question. Where is the money? The economy is improving.
Well, where's the money?
Yeah.
In fact, there's a newspaper saying jobs, where's the jobs?
Yes, but before we go to that,
yes,
let me finish with the flood, because I talked about trying to tame US flooding rivers or floods. And one of the things I found that was to show how serious they are is that the floods of main US waterways is actually controlled by the US Army Corps of Engineers. That shows how seriously they take that. Number two, if we want to control floods, we must make sure that the regulations are followed. If I'm not wrong, you are supposed to build 50 meters from the lowest tide along the coast. But people build up to the ocean. So when there's a rise in sea level, you can expect what is happening. So whether you talk about the rivers, you talk about the ocean, we are simply breaking the regulations. And then we start blaming nature. Now, let me come to your question about the economy. Two things is when there are floods, you disrupt the supply chains. So some things don't reach when they're supposed to reach where they're supposed to go. So if Mombasa Road is cut or Thika Road is cut, some supplies will not reach, and that creates a shortage. Then you have prices going up. Remember what happened to COVID when the supply chains were disrupted. We have job losses, and then that has a ripple effect in the economy. But most important, and I don't know why we are not mentioning this, is that when it floods like this, we have crops being destroyed.
Of course.
And that is going to have an effect on food prices in future. So we should not just look at the water flowing and the dams and the jokes about boats. I'm seeing people sending me a joke here asking me whether I came to the studio by boat. But I think it's a serious economic issue. So to go back to your question about is the economy improving? I think if you look at macroeconomics, things are turning up. The sharing is becoming stronger. The inflation is going down. But the question should be, is Wanjiko, is Wandoe, is Akinyi, is Kamau, is Onyango feeling that? My argument is they are probably not feeling it, because the economy improves at the macro level. It does not improve the micro level instantly. There is always a lag. So maybe in the next 6 months or so, they're going to start feeling that change in dollar price or the value of the sharing. They're going to start feeling that fall in the price of oil, because prices are very quick to go up. They are very slow to go down. Wages are very slow to go up. Taxes are very quick to go up. So I'll tell Kenyans to be cautiously optimistic until things improve. They will not improve overnight. Okay. No businessman is going to cut the tax, to cut the prices immediately just because the price of oil has gone down or because the dollar has become weaker. So it takes time for that to be affected with the economy.
All right.
So Wajiko and others, be patient. My colleagues might not agree with me.
Let me hear what Pandey has to say, because I think the conversation a year or so ago, 18 months, let me say, was short-term pain for long-term gain. So, of course, Professor here is saying, macro level is doing okay. Translating to the micro level might take some time, another 6 months. But in this same 6 months, we're seeing some tension in the Middle East. All right, so what are Kenyans expecting? I'm talking about the common wananchi watching us this morning in terms of translating that to their pockets before anything changes. Yes.
Very well. Doris, I can't agree more with Prof. Last year, we spent a lot of time arguing microeconomics and how, things were difficult at the household level and that Kenyans were feeling some beatings. But again, it's the same year that, the global GDP was predicted to shrink by a substantive portion, and that must have affected individual economies like Kenya and so forth. But I'm glad that we have some light at the end of the tunnel, finally, that we've gained, not just on the dollar, but we've gained on the local currencies, which was, again, my biggest worry, that how then were we losing to, for example, our neighbors' currencies. Unfortunately, when you have disasters such as the flooding that we're experiencing today, much as the macroeconomics are going to change and are expected to, lag and support the basics or the micros in the long run, we are still going to experience some difficulties. I'll give you an example.
Right.
Food prices are cheapest in Nairobi because all supply chains lead to the capital. People that produce in Murang'a, in Kisumu, the fisherman in Homa Bay is trying to send his fish to Nairobi. So we have food prices basically on the lowest here. And Doris, you look to be doubting. If you look at the households survey, it tells you, for example, that households spend about 49 shillings to buy food in Nairobi, as opposed to, for example, Turkana, where it's highest at 73 bob out of every 100 shillings. So ultimately, what's going to happen when Nairobi is marooned and you can't access Nairobi, you have a lot of food wastage, you have a lot of items going bad, and that instantly affects the farmer, that instantly affects the household that is not able to access food. In the long run, people are not able to till their farms, they are not able to do the substantive cropping that is supposed to help us, in 3-6 months.
Yes.
So we're still going to have some difficulties. But I'm more concerned, Doris, by stories that are affecting cross-border trade in the East African community. The day before yesterday, I was at a meeting in preparation for the IDA Heads of State meeting that is happening on Sunday and Monday. And one of the revelations that we got from a colleague that is working for one of the multinationals here in Nairobi that produces for not just the Kenyan market but for the regional market is that since last year they've had difficulties selling in Uganda for 2 reasons. One is that there was a shortage of the dollar, and in that process they were not able to pay their taxes to the Ugandan authority using the dollar. Mark you, we are talking about a common East African market that is supposed to be graduating to a common currency, but we still use the dollar to trade with Uganda, trade with Tanzania and our neighbors. So that has affected trade. The second thing was that while KEBS and the Kenyan authority accepts Uganda National Bureau of Standards, our KEBS is not recognized in Uganda, and we have a difficulty in penetrating products standardized in the Kenyan market to sell in the Ugandan market. This is happening at a time when the Africa Continental Free Trade Area has been launched in many countries have ratified and adopted this. But our own trade with the immediate neighbors is not taking shape, is not adding value to us. How has that affected the economy?
Right.
For example, this is a company that every year takes graduate trainees. So for this year, fundamentally, they've not accepted any graduates to go into the program for the mentorship and the training to become managers. We are talking about loads of jobs. So
right.
I want to look at a Kenya that is not just talking about micros and talking about household economics, but talking about macroeconomics and international trade that then trickle down to the level of the households. Because like Professor says, if we can't settle and sort out our issues at the macro level, we cannot settle issues at the micro level. Yes, we can encourage household production and incomes at that level. But once we have issues on cross-border trade, on international trade, we are grossly affected, because in this region, we're talking about fundamentally today a market of about 350 million people. If Ethiopia onboards, for example, we're going to go 450 million strong. But we are not able to hack this market. We are not able to dominate it as we should. And that must affect the local Mwananchi.
Let me pick a headline from the Business Daily at some point, and this prediction is now, different people have different analysis in as far as this report is concerned. So the forecast by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, show that Kenya will overtake Angola to become the fourth largest economy in sub-Saharan Africa this year. Of course, behind South Africa, Nigeria, and Ethiopia. This has been challenged, and I'm just picking it from what he has said, globally placing ourselves. First, you might pick from what you want to respond to, but also, what is your take on this prediction? And also some saying that our GDP is expected to grow by at least 6% this year. Are we getting there?
I think there's some truth to it, yeah. Going back to before we even get there, going back to, I did a quick Google search, and I saw that an average Kenyan earns between 30,000 and 130,000. How true that is, and how it's reflected.
30,000?
Yeah, apparently.
Okay.
Yeah, that's from a quick Google search. I don't know how true that is, but I don't think so. Going back to the IMF, you realize that these are people who are very, they're not, people think they're not our best friends, or you don't always lean towards them, but they are very slow and meticulous in how they do things. Before they make such predictions, before they make decisions to give you money, or before they usually come in and do a proper analysis. So if they have predicted in a way that, okay, this will go from here to here, they always some truth to it. So just based on their credibility, of course, they do the analysis basically for their own gain, but the results are always good for us. Yes. So if they've mentioned that maybe we're going to move from number 6 to maybe number 4, I believe it.
All right, let me hear from Professor, because Professor, the forecast sees Kenya maintaining that position ahead of Angola until 2029.
I think that's very good news, despite a few doubts. But before I comment on that, let me agree with my youth panelist here that I like his perspective, that let's not just think about the Kenyan economy, but also the wider economy, our trading partners, the East African region and so on, because one of the ways to improve our economy is to look outside. Can we expand our markets? Can we expand beyond the borders? Like the way our banks have been doing. Our banks have done very well in going beyond the borders. So as we think about flooding, as we think about improving the economy, let's look beyond the borders like other countries have done. So I'm hoping that if we can get cheaper food from Uganda or Tanzania, the prices would go down, maybe apart from Ethiopia. So I agree with you, we need to think about our borders. And it's a time we actualize the East African community, so that there's that recognition we're talking about, whether it is KEBS, whether it is education, whether it is lawyers, We recognize one another. Yes. Now, I like your statistics that if we add Uganda, Ethiopia, East Africa will be about 500 million people.
Yes.
That's the population of European Union. And that's a big economic market if you can exploit it. Now, to your question. I saw that headline that Kenya is going to be the 4th biggest economy in Africa. And I was walking with a stoop. I stood up because I felt very good. So if this is true, the question we should be asking is not whether we should be number 2 or number 3.
Okay.
The question is how will Wanjiko and Akinyi and others benefit from that? So Kenya becomes the 4th biggest economy because it is growing, and that has trickle-down effect to the people in the grassroots. I will be very happy. Because the question to be asking is, what is growing this economy? Because the economy can grow, but inequality also grows. So that the economy is growing, but a few people are getting more money at the expense of others. So good news, but let's make sure that this growth is also commensurate with growing equality, not inequality. For the Ethiopian, it was an interesting case because they are saying that Ethiopia is bigger than Kenya because of the way they value their currency. IMF uses the official exchange rate to give us the size of the economy. But if you use the market or the market rate of the currency, probably Kenya would be number 3. I would be more proud.
Gentlemen, for sure, just as Professor has put it, in fact, Ethiopia, according to the IMF forecast, has extended its lead over Kenya, is projected to overtake Nigeria, all right, in the 2 years to become the 2nd largest economy in the region. Now, honestly, looking at all this, there are people who challenge this, and Professor has spoken about the size of the Ethiopian economy. Let me start with the layman's language and for the viewer. When you're talking about the size of an economy, just let's break it down for Kenyans. What is the size of Kenya's economy?
Well, Doris, the size of economy is basically measured on the GDP.
Yes.
We're talking about a Kenyan economy of about $111 billion, or loosely $110 billion. We're talking about an Ethiopian economy of slightly about 126 billion ahead of us with, say, 15 or so billion. My perspective is that if our currency gains like it's doing currently, then we are able to topple Ethiopia, because the strength of the currency, as you measure your GDP against the dollar, because that's the standard measure, is when you grow in strength and your exchange rates, you gain more in terms of exchange and cross or international trade, you basically become a stronger economy. So Ethiopia is edging us, not based on the amount of trade in Ethiopia, but the strength of their currency. So our economies rely on basically the strength of exchange against the dollar, but also in terms of the ability to export and to earn more in terms of foreign direct investments and capacity for investors to come in. For a long time, Kenya has been seen as the hub in trade for the East African market, for the African market. It is not possible that we lose that to our neighbors. There has been fears that Ethiopia has taken a bit of that. Rwanda is taking a bit of that.
And Tanzania has been termed as a threat at some point, I think, last year.
Possibly it's one of the economies that are expanding and probably would be listed among the top 10 in a short while. But the ability of Kenya to leapfrog to the 4th largest is such a good thing. And my take is, you asked how this would translate to the local mwananchi and if it would change lives. It would certainly do, because we're talking about devolution.
Right. And
one aspect of devolution is that our county's shareable revenue is charged on the country's latest audited reports, but that's also dependent on the GDP. So in in the expansion of the economy, in Kenya growing to number 4, it means that the GDP has expanded. And when it expands, then it means the amount that then counties are able to get from the shareable revenue also increases. When that increase, we hope that it translates to service delivery at the grassroots. We're able to build more roads through the county revenue fund. We're able to do more in terms of health facilities. We're able to do more in terms of ECD and TVET education for the youth, for example. We're able to apportion more for youth, women, and persons with disability fund. So in my take, Kenya growing at a macro level means Kenya growing at a micro level. The GDP expanding means more to counties, more to devolved units, and more to service delivery.
Now, picking it from, his expertise point of view, I still feel like, he's saying at the macro level, the Kenyans are still taxing. In fact, right here on my phone, they're saying, fine, fair enough that it is doing well at the macro level. Now, the Mwananchi is saying, or Professor saying, give it 6 months to feel it. And Panda, this is where the problem is at.
Yes.
Are the prices of onions going down? Unga, fuel, fine, but you've just said the floods are getting in the way as well.
Yes.
So the question would be, in what extent, or to what extent, does this then translate to our cost of education? All right? Everyone's talking about food, all right? Cost of education, healthcare, salaries, because the government keeps saying we will not borrow to pay salaries. We need some stabilization. Tuva.
Yeah. So let me go back to the GDP. GDP has many aspects. Expenses from the government, how they spend their money is a big factor. How they choose to invest, right? So we say, the previous government was saying we're going to invest in roads. So the return on roads, or let's say when people start building on those particular areas, is when now we can say, okay, fine, this building is now has value, we can tax them, right? So there are a number of things which affect our GDP. We need to look at, it's not about a matter of reducing how much we're spending on tea and mandazi. Okay. There's so much going on. So at the end of the day, I know everyone is working towards the same thing. It's going to take time. It's going to take time for you to feel the impact. Whatever infrastructure we put 3, 4, 5 years ago, we're going to see them in the future. So I believe in the long term, Mwananchi is going to have a very good time in terms of how the value of money, right? But in the meantime, it's going to be a bit slow. The value of the dollar also, the value of the shilling, the roaring of the Kenya shilling is also something which we need to look at. So it's going to shift. You see, guys like Tanzania, they're almost catching up to us. The prediction is they might even do better than us. Mm-hmm. So a lot of factors are getting into defining our GDP, and we might need to first of all tighten our belt so that we can feel the impact.
Professor, we have a new Eurobond. It helped us offset some heavy burden, so we're not defaulters. That's okay. I understand that's some of the ways to work around, because a lot of Kenyans are watching. Seemingly, everyone has a loan. But even as you weigh into the other matter, the question is, with the Middle East tension, there are fears that some of these debts might come to haunt us again. So are we looking at a puzzle, a jigsaw that we are not going to be able to hack from your economist analysis perspective? We need to understand that as well.
I think one of the reasons why the shilling has strengthened is because of paying off the Eurobond.
Right, the market
felt that the Kenyan the Kenyan economy is robust enough. We can pay Eurobond and we can pay future debts. So people felt this economy is stronger than expected. But remember, we did not pay all the Eurobond. We shall still need to pay it in future. The thinking has been that if I can be able to have a child, I can be able to bring the kid up. So we hope that between now and the time we pay the next tranche of Eurobond, the economy will have improved, and it seems to be improving. So that's how the market has reacted. But I don't think we are off the odds, because if you look at the interest rates, they have gone up. If you look at the bonds that have been fruited lately, the interest are hovering around 17 to 18%. So that also makes the cost of debt go up. And that's why the government has been very vocal about bringing more taxes so that you borrow less. And you probably make the debt more manageable. So if now you bring in the floods and other natural disasters, they are coming at the wrong time.
At the wrong time?
Yeah, we should not be having them. But I also need to comment one or two things about my colleagues and GDP. If you get all the goods and services that are produced in an economy and add them up, they give you the GDP. And we should be asking a very basic question.
Yes.
Who is generating this GDP?
Okay.
And what rewards are people getting for it? And how much of it is leaking through corruption? So let's not just look at the bigger cake, but who is baking it. One problem I have with the Kenyans at large is that we spend too much time discussing on how to share the revenues, but very little time on who generates that revenue. The counties are always fighting, telling we should get more money for the national government. They should also be telling us, out of this cake we are getting for the national government, this is what we baked. So that at the end of the day, we reward the people who generate money, who generate the revenue in this country, so that we don't spend all the time sharing. And one way to expand the GDP from my colleagues is let's focus more on the external market, East African community, African free trade area. I was very happy to see an advert, I think in one of the dailies today, about a summit on Somali. Because Somali has become part of East African community. So if we can see the wider market, I think that's one way to expand the Kenyan economy. And the question now to bring Wajiko here is, what people should be asking in Wajir, they should be asking in Shamahoho, they should be asking in Taita and elsewhere is, what can I sell in this new market? East African community, African free trade area. What can I sell? What can I get from my farm and sell it to Tanzania, to Ethiopia, to Nigeria, and so on, so that we have interconnected supply chains, so that whatever I'm producing in my county, in my ward, in my village, can get better price because there's bigger demand in the global market. And that brings in the logistics, the roads, the rails, the ports, so that whatever we produce can easily get to the international market. And the only way to become competitive is to make sure that our costs go down. So let's make sure our roads are good. Power is cheap because power is a big problem. I see a lot of possibilities if we can be focused.
I want to speak on, talking about, that in East African community. The last I checked, and the grappling with the economic stability, there are experts who raised concerns on the amount of importation that we make in Kenya. In fact, a joke was made that Kenya would import as much as tomatoes and onions. And I do not know your perspective on this aspect. As much as we are intertrading, is there an extent that would be too far and detrimental to the economy? And what should the market understand at this point in time in that production versus exportation, relation?
My thinking will surprise you.
Okay.
We get cheap food from Tanzania. We get food from let's say, Uganda. Those are some of the countries that give us out of food. So if I could be asked, if we are at peace with Ugandans, with the Tanzanians, and they are good neighbors, let them produce that food because they can produce more cheaply. Then let's focus on high-value things, manufacturing, high-end services, artificial intelligence, so that we can export those high-value-added things, and we get food from them more cheaply. We are brothers and sisters. So I don't think I'm worried about importing, as long as we are importing because we are doing something better and more high-value added.
But are we, Kande? Are we just importing because we are, as a country, and I'm sorry to use this word, are using that same word at the headlines, incompetent? All right, our factories were dying. We had a number of conferences for the sugar companies, etc. The government was vocal on this. In fact, we had some very key reshuffles in cabinet, major actions. So in as far as what Professor is saying, are you in agreement? Because we want to see how this translates, because we had people working in those factories that collapsed. We have farmers in Kenya. We have now the fake fertilizer scandal. These farmers as well would make use of the land that we have in Kenya. So what is the argument? It seems to be a really big puzzle here.
There is two thoughts that I want to agree with Professor on. One is that he's bringing out an aspect of absolute and comparative advantage, and that's what countries trade on. Okay. If you can't produce gold, you can't dig everywhere to find gold. That's the naked truth. If Uganda is going to give you tomatoes, onions, because they are more of an agricultural economy, then please get that from them. Kenya is a service-based economy. We are tech-based. We are today referred to as the Silicon Savannah, which means that a lot of tech innovations are emerging from Nairobi and Kenya particularly. If we're able to sell that strongly, if we're able to sell M-Pesa to the East African economy, if our banks, like has been demonstrated, KCB, Equity, and the rest are able to go and dominate the East African economy like we are doing, we in Congo, we are in majorly all the East African markets. That's really what we need to sell. We have a superior advantage on human capacity and human capital. Why don't we sell that at the best price in the market, so that you're not just talking about agricultural production, but you're talking about the propensity of the average Kenyan to earn income to buy the produce. But again, so that you're not bullied by your neighbor, you must have some fallback plans. So you have to maintain some level of production. You don't want to concentrate on things that take a lot of your capital in terms of production or bringing into fore. But you want to keep a level where you have your own military, for example, so that you're not depending on your neighbors to back you up when you're attacked.
Okay.
So every country has to keep some level of independence and in-house production. But countries must concentrate on what they can cheaply produce and earn the highest in terms of returns. The other argument that Prof brought onto the fore is we're talking about expansion of the GDP and at the macro level, but who are the contributors to the GDP and how does it affect them? Doctors, for example, in Kenya today are saying that they are some of the highest on-source revenue earners for counties, and that's a fact. Hospitals and the health sector is earning counties a substantial amount of money. How do we pay them? How do we give returns to them in terms of salaries and allowances? For example, there is a huge debate today on intern doctors. Intern doctors do the bulky work in our hospitals. We need to take care of them, and that must not just come from the national government. It has to come also from the county government, where health is developed and intern doctors are actually earning counties' revenue.
All right. I saw a video going around, and this is not speculation, of a pastor saying Kenya is not broke. I don't know if you saw that. A very emotional, preacher at that time. And what Professor has said is we always constantly talk about, sharing revenue. And the question he has put on the table is, do we also then look at it in the same magnitude where the revenue is generated? All right, Kenyans are paying taxes, etc. But it's also talked about we are wasting resources. There are loopholes. There's corruption. And I want to hear from you, Tuva, before I bring in a story on the now war on graft. What would you pick from what the two panelists have said thus far?
I think let's just start by saying that we are not on our third Eurobond. We're actually on our seventh.
Yeah, seventh?
Seventh, yes. If you go back into history, we're showing the seventh Eurobond. That's one. And I'll still say we're not broke, because no one will lend money to a broke person. So when we go to market and ask for 1.5 billion and we get 6, right? People are willing to give us 6, right? It means we're not broke. When we go to market and people, you're asking for 70 and they give you 280, we're not broke. And we are the people who choose that, okay, fine, out of the 280, we're going to take 240. So I really strongly believe that we're not really a broke country. And that's why when we float, when we go looking for money, the economy, the financial markets are willing to give us money. Again, whatever Prof has said about exporting our best. Yes. You can do business where you're selling 10 cups or 100 cups, and someone else selling maybe one software. is able to hit you 10 times whatever you're making in a year. So I feel we shouldn't be cripples, completely depending on what other people are producing for us in terms of food. But can we concentrate on what we're good at? We are bright people. We are good at whatever we do. So our biggest exporter, maybe after tea and horticulture and the flowers, is our brains.
But the president has continually spoken on exporting labor, encouraged his cabinet and in the PG meeting saying, apply.
Yeah.
But Kenyans are saying we're applying against some passport issues.
Yeah. So again, it's a two-way. So most Kenyans might not take it positively, but the truth is that is our biggest strength, our brain capacity. And you cannot compare someone who's educated in Kenya with someone who's educated in Tanzania. We're not the same. So let them farm. Allow us to have our own farming, and so we're not really completely crippled, but allow us to concentrate on what to do best.
When did sugar not become our biggest strength, gentlemen? When did coffee or when did tea not become our biggest strength? It's interesting fine, and
it's tea, horticulture, than our brains.
Then our brains. I'll come back to that. But it's very, very important for us to maybe look at this story. It will set pace for the next conversation. We cannot run away from the fact that there's corruption in the country that is affecting the Mwananchi at the end of the day. And the Ethics and Anti-Commission has launched a high-profile investigation involving former National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani and Marsabit Governor Ali Mohammed. And the EACC maintains that Yatani, along with Governor Ali's spouses and 9 other suspects, were arrested on suspicion of misappropriating a staggering 8.2 billion shillings. Francis Ode with the details.
The investigation, which commenced at 4 a.m., witnessed Yatani escorted to EACC offices, accompanied by his legal team, including Siaya Governor James Orengo, lawyer Eugene Wamalwa, and Otiende Amolo.
The governor and the cabinet secretary, Yatani, is not under arrest. He has not been confronted with any charges at all for the entire period we have been here. He has not been asked any questions in relation to any charges.
Simultaneously, Governor Ali was arrested in Marsabit and taken to EACC regional offices in Isiolo.
The dramatic procession to Isiolo was not necessary at all, because I was told just to confirm whether these are the documents I saw in the morning, or they collected in the morning, which I did. I could easily have done it there. I am a public figure. I can't run away from government summons. I will always comply.
With the inquiry extending to the seizure of potential incriminating evidence from their Nairobi and Marsabit evidence.
It's the obligation of every Kenyan to assist any investigative agency during its investigation. There's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is when a person assisting with the investigation is mistreated in such a way as to depict them as being offenders. Now, that is what is wrong.
The EACC continues to probe allegations of office misuse and financial embezzlement, with both the former CS and governor released on the condition that they report to the EACC on May 2nd, 2024 for further inquiries.
As a result of the operations, EACC has been able to obtain valuable evidence that will support and advance the ongoing investigation. 9 suspects, including the 2 governors, that is former and current, were arrested.
I have nothing to hide from. I will always cooperate with our officers here. Let them do diligent work. They have no cause to worry. They must not be dramatic the way they did in the morning.
Ode Francis, KTN News, Nairobi.
And of course, we will not add anything to what has been said. They're saying no questions have been asked, no charges yet. But let me hear from Professor, because this we had from Mwangi Wairia's situation just last week, and it's always been you're the one who brought in the issue of misuse. Who is actually? In fact, let's talk of who is generating this revenue. Is it the Mwananchi at the Juakali?
Interesting question, because when you ask about who generates revenue in this country, it's very easy to tell, because we know who pay taxes.
Okay.
We know who wakes up at 4 a.m. in the morning. We know who does nothing. So it's very easy to know who generates this revenue. And one of the revenue generators we have always ignored are the farmers, because agriculture contributes about 25% of Kenya's GDP. But it's very hard to find Tuva and others giving you a business card saying that he's a farmer. Nobody boasts that he's a farmer, but farmers feed us. So I think it's the time we focused on these people who generate a lot of our GDP, the farmers, give them the respect they deserve and the incentive they deserve. Because they actually at the head of the supply chain, and we ignore them. I know there's a farmers party, but I don't know how many farmers are in that. Then before I go to your question of corruption, export of labor.
Right.
I'm okay with that, but I want very high level labor exported.
Very high.
I checked and I found that the head of Microsoft, the head of Google, the head of IBM are Indians. So maybe these are the people I want to see, so that tomorrow the head of Microsoft would be called Tuba or Onyango. The head of IBM should be called Wandoe, or should be called Abdi or Musyoka. So I think when we think about exporting labor, it's not just the low level, but also high quality. But
nurses, etc., are not really low level?
No, but you see, when you look at the people we want to export, we're not talking about engineers and PhD holders. We're talking about people there at the bottom, because they are more affected by unemployment. But I want everybody to be looked at, because if we have these people up there, there will be a trickle-down effect. You can imagine how good I would be feeling that my brother works for NASA, my brother works for IBM, and so on. Right. Corruption. I think to me that is Kenya's biggest broth. Kenya is a haven of entrepreneurs, is an entry to the East African region, has a lot of silicon savannah, but corruption gives us a very bad broth. Now, it's very upsetting that the people being arrested are governors. Yet a few minutes ago, we were saying that people saw devolution as our savior.
Right.
That resources, thinking, brains would be devolved to the counties. But unfortunately, corruption was also devolved. I'm not saying that those who have been arrested are guilty, but there seems to be evidence that instead of becoming centers of economic growth, counties became centers of a bit of corruption and some politics. Yet, if we really use devolution as intended, devolution would have turned around this country. Because people at the grassroots know exactly the problems Wajiko is facing. And if they know the problem Wajiko is facing, they are the best people to come up with a solution. But look at what has been happening. Counties just wait for the government to give them money. They should be doing something.
Are you being a bit too general with the county perspective? There are counties like Nairobi, Sakaja has been boasting about some revenue he's collecting.
How many counties would survive without the national government giving them money? Maybe one or two. The rest have to depend on the national government. Yet, if they focus on economic growth, becoming self-sufficient, creating jobs, Kenya would really leap.
Pandey, before we take a very short breather on this corruption issue, is it coming in between the plaza?
Corruption is such a bad thing in our nation, because it's leading us to backtrack on the gains that we made. Devolution is such a huge thing that is supposed to deal with the poverty at the grassroots level, but we are wasting funds.
We are wasting funds?
We are wasting a lot of funds. It's no secret. You read the Auditor General's report, you read the Controller of Budgets report. Every time you get red flags. My own county, for example, has had adverse reports since 2018.
Is it okay to ask which one your county is?
Consecutively for four fiscal years. That's Kisumu.
Okay.
It is shameful for county governments to keep wasting money, much as the national government is also affected by this wastage. What is disturbing is we see an issue of a former Minister of Finance, Cabinet Secretary of Treasury, yes. Sorry, and former governors, I would say Mwangi Iria, for example, being arraigned at the EACC. But who is defending them is a full-time CEO of a county. Yeah. What does that tell you? Are we concentrating on developing and building counties today and fiscal structures that would help us prevent corruption? Or are we in a political activism mode? It's wrong for a governor, for example, to stand in for another governor, ex-governor or ex-CS Treasury, because it tells you one thing. Either they are birds of a feather, or we are just playing politics. If somebody is charged with corruption today, let them face the full prosecution.
If they are charged?
Yes, full force of the law. We've wasted so much of our money, and when President Uhuru, for example, said that we were losing 2 billion a day in corruption, I think it could be way huge or bigger than the figures he was quoting, because at the end of the year, when audit reports are released, they are mind-boggling, Doris, mind-boggling.
I want to take a very short breather. Tuva, I'll come back with you, because we are trying to get to the shoes of every Kenyan. We're hoping they're relating to this conversation. But we also have very interesting events lined up. Remember the Bunge Towers, the controversial Bunge Towers. We want to know then today if, what I have in the lineup is possibility of it being officially opened today. But also President Ruto, among other things, is upbeat about new jobs as the Japanese car auction kicks off. So gentlemen, you will give me analysis of what you think. KQ ordered to pay, a man 12 million shillings for unfair sacking. We're coming to these labor conversations even more after this break. Don't go too far away. I know you're streaming on YouTube. Leave your comments and questions. I will objectively purpose to read some of your feedback for the panelists this morning. We'll be right back.